During the 19th century, Unitarians and Universalists both found themselves struggling in efforts to identify how they related to the larger Christian tradition in which they functioned and which they claimed for themselves. And this often led to a series of controversies over questions of theology, the relationship of science to religion, the relationship of congregations to communities. Unlike many other communities outside of New England, Minneapolis was, in a very real sense, a Universalist town, which meant that the Universalist Church occupied a position in this community quite unlike that of most of the settlements in the upper Midwest and frontier regions of America. Because of that, there was a strong desire on the part of many Universalists in the Minneapolis area to maintain the sense that they were a conventional religious community, very much a part of the Christian mainstream, rather than some sort of peripheral or radical group. One of the significant cases that emerged for Universalists over the course of the 19th century was the Great Heresy trial at St. Anthony Falls, where Herman Bisbee, a Universalist minister, found himself in conflict with a neighboring minister, James Tuttle, who was serving the Universalist Church in Minneapolis. It's a complicated, fascinating, and in many ways groundbreaking story.
The reason the town is here is because of the Falls of St. Anthony. The people who were attracted to this place were mostly New Englanders. They were connected to the lumber trade. Some of them came here very well capitalized, and some of them not quite as well capitalized, but many of them made a great deal of money in a fairly short period of time. In those days, there were two towns. One on the other side of the river on the west side called Minneapolis. The one on this side of the river was called St. Anthony.
Overlooking the Mississippi River at St. Anthony Falls, the impressive Winslow House Hotel was a favorite vantage point and subject of many early photographers. It was just north of the Winslow House that St. Anthony's Universalists chose to build their church.
The St. Anthony Society was founded in 1857. They built that stone building there, which was considered to be one of the best church buildings of the time in the city. It was widely written up when it was dedicated.
The new Universalist church edifice was dedicated to the service of the Lord Sunday morning. The house was crowded with nearly 500 persons. If we mistake not, it has been recently built at a cost of $16,500 and is unquestionably the most eloquent house of worship in the territory.
Now, just to put this in context, other churches of the time cost maybe $1,500 to build or $2,000 to build. So this was about 10 times the cost of your average St. Anthony church. The other little fact you should know is this was built without a mortgage. They paid cash for everything.
I think belonging to the Universalist Church was the prestigious church to belong to, judging by who were members.
There was Doralus Morrison. He later moved across the river and became the first mayor of Minneapolis. Robert Cummings from Pennsylvania, he was a banker. Woodbury Fisk, whose house still stands in St. Anthony. He later joined up with his brother-in-law, John Pillsbury, and started a flour milling company. Well, probably the first regular minister at the church was Reverend Seth Barnes. He was a good friend of Herman Bisbee. He probably recruited Herman Bisbee to come out here.
In 1865, the Reverend Herman Bisbee came to Minnesota to serve as pastor to the First Universalist Society of St. Paul. There he met Captain Russell Blakely. Blakely was the leading man in the St. Paul parish.
They did not feel ready to start, so I'd better return to New York, I was told by Blakely. I suggested a trial, and it took hold. Nevertheless, the atmosphere of the society, even after the organization, though as good as earnest friends could make it, was not what I was accustomed to enjoy.
What Bisbee is telling you here is he got into a conflict with Blakely. We may not know the exact nature of this, but I think in my reading, Bisbee was a very bright, very charismatic man, and he had no trouble questioning authority.
Day by day, and with each passing moment, strength I find to meet my trials here.
After the death of Seth Barnes in 1866, Bisbee was called by the St. Anthony congregation.
I've no cause for worry or for fear.
I believe his early sermons were certainly interesting, charismatic. He certainly was drawing a crowd. But at some point, he returns to the East. He returns to the East, and he's there exposed to the ideas of Ralph Waldo Emerson, transcendentalism, and natural religion. And he acknowledged this in a sermon in 1869. And this is where he starts his questioning.
In the last 2 years, I've passed through a religious experience that has tried me as ore is tried in the fire. Such a breaking up as Luther and his converts experienced in passing out from the shadow of the Roman Church. Such a breaking up as every seeking soul must encounter in its journey toward the land of promise. If I cannot work and worship with a man unless he believes all that I believe and rejects all that I reject, then I am not a Christian. Jesus, so affectionate, so forbearing, who gave us those blessed precepts, love thy enemies and love thy neighbor as thou love thyself, could not have designed this alienation.
There's a little insult there. Universalists, of course, they're all Protestants. The Roman Catholic Church is something they were trying to fight against. So he's comparing himself to Luther here in his questioning of what might be called Universalist dogma. He sort of sees himself as Luther, which is, it shows you he's not afraid to question authority.
While he was a minister, he worked at the St. Anthony Weekly Democrat as the business manager and its first editor. But in 1870, he lost that position for, among other things, supporting the idea of women's suffrage. The people at the paper were not ready to have an editor who was espousing those controversial and radical beliefs.
The publisher of the Weekly Democrat, Ovid Pinney, stated that Mr. Bisbee, however talented and well-suited to other positions, was totally out of place in control of a political paper.
So in 1870, Bisbee began writing under a pen name. Bisbee was really kind of out there, I think, and I think he liked to push the envelope a little bit.